destroying the village in order to save it. Theologians like Brugger and Festigi try to minimize papal statements and traditional scriptural interpretations like the ones cited above, on the grounds that they are fallible. But as I have argued, they thereby miss the point. If an individual marble weighs less than an ounce, it doesn't follow that a whole bag of marbles could weigh less than an ounce. Similarly, even if this or that individual papal statement or scriptural interpretation is fallible, it doesn't follow that 2 millennia of ordinary magisterial teaching could be fallible. It is not enough, then, for Brugger or Festigi to cast doubt on various particular papal statements or scriptural interpretations, though, as I have argued elsewhere, they fail to do even that much. In order to justify their claim that the Church could reverse her traditional teaching on capital punishment, they would have to show that it is possible for the ordinary magisterium to be wrong, even when it has consistently taught something for millennia. But as we have seen, that is not possible. Festigi in particular seems motivated, at least in part, by a desire to defend Pope Francis's statements on the death penalty, some of which seem to conflict with traditional teaching. His loyalty to the Holy Father is admirable, but this way of showing it is misguided. For one thing, the Pope's statements on the subject are persistently ambiguous. Joe Besant and I analyze a number of Francis's remarks about capital punishment at length in our book, and I devoted a recent Catholic Herald article to his most recent statement. As we have shown, while Pope Francis has certainly said things that appear to imply a reversal of traditional teaching, he has also said things that point in the opposite direction. Furthermore, the Pope is also prone to making obviously exaggerated remarks on this subject. For example, in a 2015 letter, Pope Francis approvingly quoted a remark he attributed to Dostoevsky to the effect that to kill a murderer is a punishment incomparably worse than the crime itself. In that same letter and elsewhere, he has also condemned life imprisonment. Does that mean that Catholics are obliged to consider the Nuremberg judges who sentenced Nazi war criminals to death as incomparably worse than the Nazis themselves? Does it mean that these war criminals should not have been punished even with life sentences, let alone death? Presumably not. But then it is not clear what we are supposed to take away from the Pope's remarks. For another thing, the Pope's remarks about capital punishment are part of a larger pattern of statements on a variety of subjects that are ambiguous, exaggerated, and doctrinally imprecise. Even Brugger has expressed alarm at statements from Pope Francis that appear to contradict Catholic teaching on contraception, and on marriage and divorce, grace, conscience, and Holy Communion. The Pope has also often refused to clarify his more problematic statements, even when such clarification has been formally requested by eminent theologians and members of the hierarchy. In general, then, the Pope does not appear to be interested in making clear doctrinal statements one way or the other. The proper response to this highly unusual situation is surely one of great caution. While it is true that Pope Francis has not clearly reaffirmed traditional teaching on capital punishment, it cannot be said that he has clearly rejected it either. Indeed, Festigi himself has said that it's not clear whether Pope Francis has himself taken the position that the death penalty is intrinsically immoral. But if the traditional teaching is ancient, unambiguous, and explicitly intended to clarify doctrine, whereas Pope Francis's remarks are very recent, unclear, and not necessarily intended to revise doctrine, then the latter can hardly justify calling the former into question. Finally, even if Pope Francis had clearly and unambiguously taught that capital punishment is intrinsically evil, that would not justify rejecting past papal teaching. For as we have seen, that past teaching is irreformable. If Pope Francis or any other pope were to contradict it, he would simply be guilty of a doctrinal error. While papal error of this sort is extremely rare, there are only a handful of possible cases in 2 millennia of church history. The Church recognizes that it can happen when a pope is not speaking ex cathedra. And there could be no surer sign that it has happened than if a pope were to teach something that contradicted the unanimous teaching of Scripture, the Fathers and Doctors of the Church, and all previous popes. Archbishop Charles Chaput, despite his firm opposition to capital punishment, has stated, "The death penalty is not intrinsically evil. Both Scripture and long Christian tradition acknowledge the legitimacy of capital punishment under certain circumstances. The Church cannot repudiate that without repudiating her own identity." The reason the Church cannot repudiate it, without repudiating her own identity, is that to repudiate this teaching would be to affirm that the ordinary magisterium has been leading the faithful into grave moral and doctrinal error for 2 millennia. That would entail that the ordinary magisterium does not, after all, enjoy divine assistance, so that the Church is not what she has always claimed to be. Accordingly, defending Pope Francis by calling into question the clear and consistent teaching of 2 millennia is, to borrow a notorious expression from the Vietnam War era, like destroying a village in order to save it. It undermines the credibility of all popes, including Pope Francis himself. It's that simple and that serious.